In the summer of 1969, when Woodstock's music echoed faintly on AM radios and young men shipped out to Vietnam, the Stillwater train station in rural Nebraska stood quiet, a relic of a fading era. Dust swirled across the platform, where no one waited, except for a man named Elijah Roe, a Vietnam veteran who'd come home to his father's ranch after the war. At 35, he was a man of few words, his hands calloused from mending fences, his heart carrying the weight of battles he'd never speak of. He was there to pick up a delayed shipment of barbed wire, not to change a life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The noon train screeched in, its whistle sharp against the prairie wind. A young woman stumbled out, her white dress torn, her face pale beneath smudged dirt. She wore no coat, though the wind carried a chill and her boots were caked in mud. Clutched in her trembling hand was a crumpled train ticket. She scanned the empty platform, eyes wide with panic, and then collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Elijah moved before he thought. A hero doesn't always wear a medal. Sometimes he's just a man who kneels beside a stranger. "Miss," he said softly, touching her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, blue as a forgotten sky. "Don't let him find me," she whispered, voice raw with fear, before slipping back into unconsciousness. Elijah carried her to his old Ford pickup, laying her gently across the worn blanket in the back. The station master muttered, "Your business?" But Elijah didn't answer. He drove her to his ranch, a modest house where his mother's rose garden still bloomed, a nod to the 1960s when life felt simpler, when neighbors shared apple pies, and transistor radios played Elvis. That night she slept in the spare room under a quilt his mother had sewn. Elijah sat by the fire turning over the ticket she'd dropped. It read Clara Belle Morton Stillwater, but on the back, scrawled in desperate ink, were 4 words. "He's not who you think." Elijah's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in Vietnam to know what fear looked like, and this woman wore it like a second skin. She woke to the smell of coffee and cornbread, the kind Elijah's mother used to make for church potlucks. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her borrowed flannel dress too big, her wrists bruised. "You didn't ask my name," she said, voice steady but guarded. "Didn't seem like you wanted to share it," Elijah replied, pouring her coffee. He moved like he'd done this forever. Quiet, deliberate, a man who'd learned patience in foxholes. "I'm not Clara," she said finally, sitting at the oak table. "Not anymore." "Then start over," he said, sliding the coffee toward her. "You've got tonight to decide who you'll be tomorrow." She sipped the coffee, her hands steadying. "You sound like someone who's run before." Elijah's eyes softened, but he didn't answer. He'd come back from Vietnam not just to heal, but to rebuild, to plant roots where others saw only dust. He handed her a ledger, the one he used for cattle counts. "Write your future here," he said. "No one's chasing you tonight." Before dawn, a knock rattled the gate. A man in a black coat, his posture too sharp for a neighbor, stood by a horse. "Looking for a girl," he said, voice flat. "Clara Morton. Came in on the Stillwater train." Elijah leaned against the fence, his old army calm settling in. "Train didn't stop here, you're too far west." The man's eyes narrowed. "She's confused, family's worried." "She got a name?" Elijah asked. "Only one she's supposed to answer to." the man said, his smile cold. Elijah's voice didn't waver. Best figure out which one before you drag her back. The man rode off, but Elijah knew he'd return. Inside, the woman was kneading dough, her hands steady now. He came, didn't he? She asked. He's not done 2-2 system. Done looking, Elijah said. She met his gaze. Neither am I. That night she told him everything. Her name wasn't Clara. She'd taken the identity of a bride who'd backed out, desperate for a new life. The man who'd claimed her, Henry Lane, wasn't the kind veteran he'd promised to be. His charm had turned to control, his words to bruises. She'd fled his cabin barefoot in her wedding dress and caught a train to nowhere, until she landed in Stillwater. You left a letter warning the real Clara, Elijah said, his voice low. That's the kind of truth that saves someone. She blinked, tears welling. It didn't save me. It led you here, he said. That's a start. She opened the ledger and wrote a name. Lena Ray Whitlow. Her grandmother's first name, her mother's middle, and Ray for the light she'd lost but was finding again. Weeks later, a stranger arrived. Not Henry, but a man claiming to be Clara's brother. He handed Lena a note from the real Clara. You gave me my life. Lena's tears fell, but she stood tall. I'm not Clara, she said. I'm Lena. The man tipped his hat. Seems you found what you needed. That night, Lena burned the dress, the ticket, the lies. As the flames rose, she turned to Elijah. I used to think running was weakness, she said, but it's survival. You didn't just survive, he replied. You chose. Years later, the ranch thrived. Lena and Elijah raised a daughter, Hope, named for the life they'd built from ash. Neighbors stopped asking about the runaway bride. They asked how Lena kept going. She'd smile and say, I didn't run, I arrived. Call to action. This is a story of kindness, courage, and unsung heroes. Share your own stories of just kindness matters or just unsung heroes in the comments below. Let's inspire each other with heartwarming moments that remind us of the good in the world. Subscribe for more uplifting stories and hit the bell for weekly doses of hope.